Their silence isn't peace, it's a power play. At first, it feels like a break, a quiet after the chaos, a moment to breathe. But then the silence lingers. Not a peaceful kind of silence. Not the kind that happens between two people who are reflecting or healing or trying to figure out how to love each other better. This is different. This silence is loaded, sharp around the edges. It hums with tension like a bomb that hasn't gone off yet. And somewhere inside, this isn't just absence. This is a message. Because when a narcissist goes silent, it's never truly about walking away. It's about staying in your mind without having to be present in your life. It's about keeping you suspended, stuck in a place of wondering, waiting, unraveling. You're left parsing every moment before the silence. Every word, every look, trying to understand what you did, to deserve the sudden vanishing act. That confusion, that panic, that ache, that's the point. To them, silence is power. It's a performance of control. It says, I don't need you, but I know you still need me. And the more you sit in the silence, the louder it gets. The louder your thoughts become, and the more power they feel they've gained over you. See, the narcissist doesn't just want you to feel abandoned. They want you to believe you caused it. They want you to think their absence is your punishment. That if you had just loved them better, stayed quiet, bent a little more, they'd still be around. But this silence isn't about you. It never was. It's about their need to maintain dominance, without having to argue for it. Because when you're confused, you're controllable. When you're hurting, you're reachable. When you're doubting yourself, you're easier to break. And what they count on most is that you'll keep holding on, that you'll stay hooked to the fantasy, not of who they were, but of who you thought they could be. But here's the truth most people don't see until they're deep in it. Their silence isn't an accident. It's a weapon, a tactic, a strategy designed to create emotional chaos, while they sit back and watch from a distance, completely detached, yet still orchestrating your pain. And the longer they stay away, the more they believe their silence is working. But what they never expect is what happens when the silence no longer scares you, what they want you to feel while they're gone. The silence isn't just a pause. It's an emotional trap. You think they're gone, but they're still speaking, just without words. They want their absence to echo louder than their presence ever did. They want the silence to wrap around your thoughts like a fog, until you can't see clearly anymore. Not your worth, not your instincts, not even the truth of how they treated you. This isn't someone who left to heal, or to grow, or even to process. This is someone who disappeared to see how long it would take for you to break. Because every second they're gone, they hope something begins to crack inside you. They want you to second-guess the fight you had, replay it, rewrite it, regret it. They want you to reach the conclusion, maybe I was too much. Maybe I should have kept quiet. Maybe they were right about me. And in that moment, that quiet collapse, they feel powerful. They've pulled you back into orbit without lifting a finger. That's the game. They want to see how much silence it takes before you'll do the thing they crave most, reach out. Not because they miss you, but because you're reaching out confirms what they always wanted to believe, that they can be cruel and still be wanted. It's not about reconciliation. It's about superiority. They want you to feel that you're the one chasing, pleading, bleeding. They want the silence to turn your self-worth into a question mark. And the longer they're silent, the more they believe they've won. Because silence, to the narcissist, is never just silence. It's psychological warfare dressed in stillness. It's them watching you from afar, waiting for the collapse they know so well, because they've orchestrated it before. But here's what they don't realize. There comes a point where the silence no longer feels like confusion. It feels like clarity. There comes a point when the quiet becomes a mirror. And for the first time, you're not asking, why did they leave? You're asking, why did I ever need them to stay? Why their silence is a test, and who fails it? What they don't say is everything. The silence is calculated, and the goal is simple: to see if you'll abandon yourself, just to not be abandoned by them. Because in their mind, the one who breaks the silence first loses, and they have every intention of winning. Not love, not peace, not connection, but control. It's not just silence, it's bait. They want to know, will you fold just to keep them comfortable? Will you apologize for things you never did, just to make the ache stop? Will you chase them, even after they left you in emotional darkness? And when you do, they win. Not because you love them, but because they trained you to need their validation more than your own dignity. This is what makes them feel powerful. Not the connection, but the idea that your nervous system, your peace, your entire mood, still hinges on their presence. That's the real addiction they have. Not to people, but to the high of knowing someone else is emotionally starving for them. So they test you. They go silent. They ghost. They retreat into that cold, distant shell, and they wait. Not to fix anything, but to measure you. And the truth is, many people fail this test. Not because they're weak, but because they care. Because they're anxious. Because they're trauma bonded. Because they believe silence means punishment. And they want to stop the pain. So they reach out. They beg. They try to be the bigger person. And the narcissist sees it for what it is: an opening, a surrender, a chance to re-enter your life. Not with love, but leverage. Because now they know something important. You fear their silence more than you trust your own boundaries. And they will weaponize that fear. Again, and again, and again. But something else happens quietly. When you don't reach out. When you let the silence stand. When you refuse to dance with their manipulation. They notice. Not with admiration. Not with love. But with discomfort. Because narcissists can't sit still in uncertainty. They can dish out silence. But they can't tolerate it when it turns into your peace. Because when you no longer fear losing them, they start to fear losing control. What happens when you don't break the silence? Something begins to unravel. But not in you, in them. Because silence was only ever a weapon, if it worked. And now, it doesn't. You're not texting. You're not calling. You're not folding yourself into knots to make the discomfort go away. And suddenly, the one who felt powerful now feels invisible. Narcissists don't just want you to react. They need you to, because your reaction is their proof that you still care, that they still matter, that they can still reach inside your life and stir up chaos just by withdrawing their presence. But when you don't move, when you don't flinch, when you stay grounded in your truth and let them sit in the echo of their own silence, they lose something far more important than your attention. They lose their grip. Because a narcissist without control is just a person, panicking in the emptiness they created. They may not show it. They may even double down, staying silent longer, hoping you'll break eventually. But what eats at them isn't your voice. It's the absence of your desperation. It's you not chasing. It's you not proving. It's you not performing emotional CPR for someone who left you breathless. And beneath all their bravado, something starts to burn. What if they've moved on? What if they're not coming back? What if my silence didn't scare them? It freed them. Because here's what narcissists rarely prepare for: the day their silence makes you stronger. Not colder, not cruel, just clear. Because when you stop trying to decode their absence, you finally start listening to your own presence. And in that space, the silence doesn't feel like punishment anymore. It feels like peace. When silence stops hurting and starts healing, there comes a turning point where the ache of their silence no longer echoes inside you. Not because you've hardened, but because you've softened toward yourself. You stop pacing by the phone. You stop rehearsing what you'll say. When they finally reach out, you stop playing the game because you finally see it for what it is. A cycle, one built on the illusion that love is something you must earn, by tolerating mistreatment, by staying patient while they disappear, by proving your worth through loyalty, even when it's one-sided. But healing begins the moment you decide, I am not waiting for someone to remember I exist, because silence loses all its power the second you stop making it mean something about you. It's not evidence that you were too much, or not enough, or unworthy of a reply. It's just a reflection of where they're at. And that's not your burden to carry anymore. You start filling the quiet with better things. Conversations that feel mutual. Laughter that doesn't come with conditions. Peace that doesn't come and go depending on someone else's emotional whims. And without realizing it, you start living the kind of life that no longer fits inside their manipulative frameworks. Because real love doesn't teach you to suffer in silence. It teaches you to speak, to be seen, to be met. You begin reclaiming yourself, not in loud declarations, but in quiet decisions. To not reply, to not explain, to not chase, to simply move on. And that's when the dynamic changes. Not because they finally spoke, but because you stopped listening for them. You realized their silence was never about healing space. It was about holding power. But your healing? That's about reclaiming it. When they sense you've let go, the shift begins. It happens quietly. At first, they don't notice. They assume the silence still hurts you. They assume they're still in control. But somewhere deep inside, they feel the shift. You're no longer orbiting around their silence. You're not checking if they've watched your stories. You're not posting to get a reaction. You're not reaching out, not even in subtle ways. You've unplugged from the game. And that is when the tension starts to build. For them, they expected time to make you more desperate. They thought distance would weaken your boundaries. They assumed silence would break you. But instead, it freed you. You started rebuilding your self-worth without their validation. You stopped looking for closure and created your own. You realized that someone who truly cared would never weaponize absence as control. And this realization, it changes the energy between you. Because control only works when you play along, when you stay emotionally entangled in the storyline they've crafted. One where you're the one left wondering, apologizing, overgiving, waiting. But now, you're gone. Not physically perhaps, but emotionally, energetically. They can feel your detachment. And here's what happens next. They become restless. That silence they were so confident in, it turns against them. They start wondering why you haven't cracked, why you haven't begged, why you haven't reached back out, even just to argue, to plead, to keep the bond alive. Because even conflict was connection to them. And now, there's nothing, just the echo of their own silence. Suddenly, the control they once felt feels like a prison, not for you, but for them. Because when power is built on silence, it only lasts as long as someone else is listening, and you've stopped listening. The game of silence, a narcissist's favorite illusion of power. When a narcissist withdraws into silence, it's not just a pause, it's a maneuver. It's never about needing time to reflect. It's not because they're processing. Silence, for the narcissist, becomes a strategic form of psychological control. A silent war where the ammunition is your confusion, your self-doubt, your endless questioning of what went wrong. This isn't a peaceful quiet. It's weaponized absence. To the narcissist, silence is seductive because it speaks louder than confrontation. It says, "You're not worth my words." It's a test. Will you chase me? Will you beg for crumbs of clarity? Will you surrender your boundaries just to feel close again? They don't want resolution. They want submission. And the more you spiral inward, scanning through every conversation, every moment, wondering where it all shifted, the more powerful they feel. Because the silence convinces them of this. If you still care enough to suffer, they still matter more than you do. The power they borrow is never theirs to keep. Here's what narcissists misunderstand. This power they think they hold. This high they feel when you're in panic, in limbo, in grief. It's not real power. It's borrowed. It's temporary, dependent, fragile. Their silence holds power only as long as you keep internalizing it. The moment you stop seeing it as your fault, the moment you start recognizing it as manipulation, the illusion starts to shatter. You were never powerless. You were just emotionally invested in someone who twisted your empathy into leverage. When the narcissist notices you're no longer chasing, when they sense your nervous system has calmed and your center has returned, they'll feel it. Their silence, once so sharp and smug, begins to feel hollow. Because narcissistic control only thrives when you participate in it, and you just stop playing. They thought your love was weakness, but they forgot. The most dangerous person is the one who heals while you're gone. What they never expect you to do. Narcissists expect you to fall apart. They expect rage texts, tearful voice notes, desperate explanations. They anticipate your collapse because they mistake your openness for fragility. But here's what unnerves them. Stillness, not the kind they perform. Cold, performative withdrawal. But your stillness, the kind that comes from deep inner clarity. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't break, doesn't barter for attention. They don't know how to respond to your silence. When it's not coming from pain, but from peace. When you stop reacting, they lose their grip. Because narcissistic power isn't real. Unless it's mirrored back in your suffering. You weren't just a supply to them. You were the mirror that made them feel important. So when you stop reflecting their importance, stop chasing their presence, stop collapsing in their absence, they panic. Quietly, subtly, but absolutely. They'll return in strange ways. Sudden likes on old posts, cryptic messages, accidental mistakes. They'll test the waters without apology. Because accountability was never part of their design. But you won't be standing where they left you. You're no longer available to the old dynamic. The doors they once entered through. Emotional guilt, codependent longing, fear of abandonment are now locked, sealed by awareness. You didn't just survive the silence. You transformed inside it. And that terrifies them. The silence was never about you. It was always about control. You replayed their silence as a reflection of your worth. You examined your flaws, your reactions, your every word, wondering if you were too much or not enough. But what if the silence had nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who they need you to think you are? Because here's the secret. Silence was never their retreat. It was their stage. They wanted you to wait in confusion, to crave clarity. They wanted your self-esteem to shrink enough for them to feel large again. The goal wasn't resolution. It was to reinforce the imbalance. They silence you to destabilize you. They punish your independence with distance. They teach you that love is something that vanishes the moment you assert a boundary. But this silence, it reveals more about them than it ever did about you. It shows a person who cannot face their own feelings, so they punish yours instead. It shows someone who avoids accountability and calls it space. It shows a person who mistakes withdrawal for strength, because intimacy terrifies them more than loneliness does. When you realize that, their silence loses its magic. Because the truth is, silence from someone who truly cared wouldn't feel like punishment. It would feel like rest. And you? You deserve rest. Not the torment of emotional exile. Not the agony of love turned into a power game. Not the feeling that affection must be earned through suffering. You deserve connection that doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. The moment they realize you're not waiting anymore, there's a moment, quiet but seismic, when they feel it. They may not say anything. They may not even admit it to themselves. But something shifts. The texts don't come. The late-night typing bubbles don't appear. The old dynamics they relied on. Your anxious reaching, your over-explaining, your vulnerability used as a doorway, it's gone. They can feel the silence now, too. But this time, it's your silence. Not as a weapon, not as a strategy, but as something far more terrifying to a narcissist: indifference. Because once you stop needing their validation, once you stop letting their absence dictate your identity, they lose the emotional control they once mistook for intimacy. You stop performing, and now they're alone with the performance they called love. No one to impress, no one to manipulate, no one reflecting their fantasy self back to them. They thought you were weak because you felt deeply, but now they realize the person who heals deeply is the one they can't reach anymore. Why your absence echoes louder than their silence ever could. At first, they believed silence gave them control, that your need for closure made you predictable, that your love made you pliable. But then something changed, not in them, but in you. You stopped chasing the noise behind their quiet. You stopped trying to decode the pauses. You stopped interpreting withdrawal as depth. And when you did, the power they thought they had dissolved. Because they never prepared for your absence. Not the kind where you rage or plead or leave a door cracked open, but the kind of absence that doesn't check if they noticed you're gone. The kind that doesn't write paragraphs or send reminders of your worth. The kind that no longer seeks validation from someone who made love feel like punishment. That's what haunts a narcissist. Not being hated, not being blocked, but being irrelevant. And your peace, your sacred, earned, grounded peace, becomes deafening to them. Because in that stillness, they realize something. You weren't the one who disappeared. You were the one who woke up. They used silence as a game. You used it as a doorway to return to yourself. Now it's their turn to sit in the quiet. Only this time, there's no one on the other end trying to make sense of it. When the mask slips and the narcissist faces their own void, they crafted silence like a sculptor, carefully shaping it to control you. But there's something they never considered. That silence, when no longer reflected back by your energy, becomes a mirror, and now they're staring into it. What do they see? A person who never learned how to truly connect, only how to perform. A person who mistook control for closeness. A person whose entire identity relied on being admired, not known. And when admiration fades, when supply stops flowing, when your light no longer orbits their emotional gravity, they confront a terrifying truth. There is no self beneath the mask. Only fragments of other people they've borrowed. Only a hollow core that echoes with insecurity. They thought your silence would mean longing. Instead, it exposed their loneliness. They believed you were broken by their distance, but you were actually rebuilt by it. Because here's the paradox of the narcissist's silence. It destroys only the illusions. The real you? The one who grew, who healed, who stopped begging for breadcrumbs of affection. That version of you thrives in silence. But them? They remain imprisoned in a role they can no longer keep up. They feel the cracks. In the persona, in the control, in the mask. And by the time they realize you saw behind it all, you're already gone. Not just physically, but energetically. No more explaining, no more waiting, no more saving. Just presence in your own life, and absence from the games. They thought you'd wait forever until you didn't. They relied on the version of you that stayed. The one who waited anxiously for a reply, who overanalyzed every delay, who softened your boundaries just to keep them close. They banked on your consistency while offering none of their own. And when they went silent, it wasn't just avoidance. It was a calculated test. How much can I disappear and still be wanted? How long can I ignore them and still feel important? But every test has an expiration date. And one day, quietly, invisibly to them, you expired. Not out of spite, not to punish, but because your soul grew tired of waiting for crumbs. In a palace you helped build, they thought your love meant forever. But real love isn't a leash. It's a mirror. And when you looked into yours, you finally saw the cost of staying. Your joy, your peace, your truth. So you stopped waiting. You stopped checking. You stopped trying to revive what they kept killing with silence. And that's when they noticed. Not because you sent a dramatic goodbye, but because the absence of your energy was the loudest sound they had ever heard. They thought they were in control until the silence turned on them. And in that echo, they realized it was never your presence that made them powerful. It was your love. And once it was gone, so was their illusion of control. You were the storm they thought they could silence. They thought silence was the ultimate weapon. They thought walking away, ghosting, withholding warmth, affection, closure, would leave you broken, crushed under the weight of not knowing. They believed that your craving for clarity meant they still had you. That if you wanted to talk, it meant you hadn't healed. That if you missed them, it meant they were still needed. That your silence was defeat, not power. But silence, in the hands of someone who once loved deeply, becomes a language louder than any word. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop performing emotional acrobatics to win someone back who had long stopped showing up as someone worth reaching for. And they felt it. Not immediately, not publicly, but over time, they began to notice that something they once fed on was gone. They could no longer sense your pain from afar, couldn't feel your energy orbiting around them, couldn't drink from the well of your empathy, because it was no longer pouring in their direction. And that silence, that same silence they once used as a shield, now echoed in their own empty world. They wanted control. You gave them space. They wanted chaos. You gave them calm. They wanted a reaction. You gave them peace. And nothing haunts someone who manipulates through absence more than realizing their absence no longer affects you. Because it means this: you saw through it all. The games, the withholding, the punishments disguised as boundaries, the silence sold as strength. You recognized it for what it really was: a loud declaration of emotional immaturity, a final act of ego trying to pass itself off as dignity. But your healing became your answer. You didn't post it. You didn't announce it. You didn't need revenge. Because you were never the weak one. You were the one who felt too much, loved too honestly, gave too deeply. And when someone like that goes quiet, not out of pain, but out of clarity, it's already over. They don't realize it until much later, until the silence becomes unsettling, until their next audience doesn't react the way you did, until they miss the way your love made them feel seen, until their control no longer works, until they realize the one person who truly cared doesn't need them anymore. So let them sit in the silence they chose. Let them believe they won. Let them mistake your distance for defeat. Because you know the truth. The longer they're silent, the more power they think they have. But the longer you stay quiet, the more you realize they never had any at all.